Ex-Ranger saves widow from corrupt, judge uncovers railroad conspiracy in 1882, Arizona. Before we dive into this incredible true story of courage and justice in the Old West, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. If stories of honor, redemption, and standing up against corruption move you, give us a like. It helps more people discover these powerful tales. Stay until the end to see how one broken man's choice to help a desperate widow changed the fate of an entire territory. Now let's ride into Devil's Creek, Arizona, 1882. The Colt 45 spoke twice before Jake Hawkins could set down his whiskey. December wind howled through Devil's Creek, Arizona territory, carrying gun smoke and a woman's scream that cut deeper than any blade. Jake had been nursing that same glass for 3 hours in Murphy's saloon, watching dust motes dance in the fading light of another wasted afternoon. The amber liquid hadn't touched his lips yet. He just held it, stared through it, saw Elizabeth's face distorted in the whiskey's depths. 3 years. 3 years since the Apache raid on his homestead. 3 years since he'd found what was left of his wife and son behind the burned chapel. 3 years of trying to drown himself one bottle at a time and failing even at that. Not your problem, Hawkins. Murphy's voice came from behind the bar, already ducking low, like a man who'd survived too many saloon shootouts. Remember what happened last time you played hero? Jake's hand found the Navy Colt at his hip, the gun he'd sworn never to draw again. His fingers traced the worn grip, feeling the grooves his palm had carved over 15 years of ranging. The metal was cold. Everything was cold now. Another shot cracked through the afternoon. Then came a child's cry, high, terrified young. The sound reached into Jake's chest and squeezed something he'd thought long dead. Damn it all to hell. He was moving before his mind caught up with his body. The saloon doors banged open against the wall. December air hit him like a slap sharp and with the smell of snow coming down from the mountains. His boots found purchase on the frozen mud of Main Street. The shots had come from the Sullivan place, a small homestead at the town's eastern edge. Jake knew it the way he knew every building, every alley, every hiding spot in Devil's Creek. You learn these things when you spent 3 years avoiding human contact. He moved along the building's shadows, keeping to the boardwalk where his footsteps wouldn't crunch in the frozen dirt. The Navy Colt came out smooth and quiet, like it had never left his hand. Muscle memory was a dangerous thing. It made you remember who you used to be. The Sullivan cabin sat crooked against the hillside, its walls weathered gray as old bones. One window was broken glass teeth still clinging to the frame. The door hung open, swaying in the wind like a hanged man. Jake pressed against the outer wall, listening. Inside, furniture crashed. A man laughed, the sound of a rattlesnake's warning. "That rifle's been empty for 10 minutes, Mrs. Sullivan." The voice was cultured, southern, dripping with the kind of confidence that came from never facing consequences. "Your husband couldn't pay his debts. Now you will." Jake knew that voice. Luther Kane, Judge Blackwood's enforcer. Ex-Confederate cavalry, the kind who'd never accepted that the war ended 17 years ago. The kind who thought might made right and a badge made it legal. "Get out," a woman's voice, Irish accent thick with fury and fear. "Get out of my house, you bastards." "Such language from a lady," Kane again. "Your husband owed Judge Blackwood $200. Due 3 months ago. With interest, that's $300 now. You got $300 hidden in this shack, Mrs. Sullivan." "You know I don't. You know Thomas is dead. Dead men's debts don't die with them. That's the law." Jake moved to the window, risked a look. The scene inside made his jaw clench. Mary Sullivan stood in the center of her ransacked cabin like the last soldier in a losing war. Blood ran from her split lip, and her blue calico dress was torn at the shoulder. But she held her husband's old Springfield rifle steady, aimed at Luther Kane's chest. Behind her, 2 children huddled against the far wall, a boy, maybe 10, wheezing with each breath, and a girl around 13, her arms wrapped protective around her brother. Kane stood relaxed, almost bored, his hand resting on the showfield at his hip. 2 other men flanked him, hired guns with the dead eyes of men who'd forgotten why they killed, only remembered how. "That's a heavy rifle for a woman," Kane said, taking a step forward. "Why don't you put it down before you hurt yourself? Take one more step and find out how much it hurts." Kane smiled. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed his work. "Boys, I believe Mrs. Sullivan needs a lesson in manners." The man on Kane's left started forward, Mary swung the rifle toward him, and that's when Jake saw it, the slight dip in the barrel, the way her arms trembled. Kane was right. The rifle was empty. Jake came through the door low and fast. His first shot took the advancing gunman in the shoulder, spinning him into the wall. The second shot shattered a lantern near Kane's head, spraying oil and glass. Jake had meant to miss. He needed Kane talking, not dead. "Nobody move." Jake's voice came out rusty from disuse gravelly as a shovel in dirt. "Everybody stays real still, and maybe we all walk out of here." Kane's hand twitched toward his gun. "Don't." Jake shifted his aim to Kane's head. "I got 4 bullets left, and there's only 3 of you standing. I like those odds." Jake Hawkins. Kane's smile widened. The famous ranger turned drunk. "Heard you were haunting Murphy's place trying to find the bottom of every bottle in the territory. Found something else instead. This ain't your business, Hawkins. This is a legal debt collection authorized by Judge Blackwood himself." "Legal." Jake tasted the word like something rotten. "That what you call kicking in a widow's door, threatening children, that your idea of legal, Kane? The law's the law." "The law." Jake took a step forward, keeping his gun steady. "I wore a badge for 15 years, Kane. Never once did the law tell me to terrorize women and children." The wounded gunman groaned, trying to crawl toward his dropped pistol. Jake put a bullet in the floor an inch from his fingers. The man froze. 3 bullets left," Jake said conversationally. "Still like my odds." Kane's eyes narrowed, calculating. "You're interfering with lawful business, Hawkins. Judge Blackwood won't forget this." "Good. Tell the judge Jake Hawkins remembers him too. Remembers a lot of things, like how his son died in that Apache raid. Funny thing about that raid, Apaches don't usually attack that far north, unless someone pays them to." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kane's smile finally disappeared. "That's a dangerous accusation. It's a dangerous world." Jake gestured with his gun toward the door. "Your friend there needs a doctor. Better get him looked at before he bleeds out on Mrs. Sullivan's clean floor." For a moment, the room balanced on a knife's edge. Jake could see Kane weighing his options, calculating whether he could draw and fire before Jake put him down. The ex-Confederate's hand trembled slightly above his gun. Then Mary Sullivan pumped another round into her empty rifle, the mechanical sound loud in the silence. It was a bluff, but it tipped the balance. "This isn't over," Kane said. "The debt's still owed. 3 days, Mrs. Sullivan. 3 days to come up with $300, or we come back with the sheriff and legal papers. And next time your drunken guardian angel won't be enough." Kane backed toward the door, motioning for his men to follow. The wounded one stumbled out, leaving a trail of blood on the floor. At the doorway, Kane turned back. "You just signed your own death warrant, Hawkins. You and the widow both. Wouldn't be my first." They left, and Jake stood there, listening to their horses retreat into the distance. Only when the hoofbeats faded completely did he lower his gun. Mary Sullivan dropped the rifle. It clattered on the floor, and she followed it down, knees hitting the boards hard. She didn't cry, just sat there, shaking her children, rushing to her side. "Mama." The girl's voice was steady, older than her years. "Mama, you're hurt." "I'm fine, Rose. Just need a moment." Jake looked at them, this small, broken family huddled on the floor of their ransacked home, and felt something crack inside his chest. Something that had been frozen for 3 years. The boy was wheezing harder now, his breath coming in short, painful gasps. His lips had a blue tinge that Jake recognized. He'd seen it before in children who couldn't get enough air, whose lungs were drowning them from the inside. "Your boy needs help," Jake said. Mary looked up at him, and Jake saw fierce pride warring with desperation in her green eyes. "He needs medicine. Medicine I can't afford. Doctor says there's a treatment in Tucson, but it costs." She laughed bitter as winter wind. "It costs more than we ever had, even when Thomas was alive." "Thomas Sullivan, I knew him." Jake had bought horses from the man back when Jake still had a reason to need horses. "Good man. Sorry for your loss." "Murdered." The word came out flat and hard. "Oh, they called it an accident. Cave-in at the silver mine." But Thomas knew something was happening. He'd been writing things down, keeping track of strange deals and threats. Then one day the mine just happened to collapse. Only killed him and 2 others who'd been asking questions. Jake felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. Old instincts, the kind that had kept him alive through 15 years of ranging, started whispering. What kind of questions? About land rights, about why Judge Blackwood was suddenly so interested in buying up homesteads along Skeleton Ridge, about the surveyor who came through last month measuring and marking. Mary stood slowly, one hand pressed to her ribs. Thomas thought something big was coming. Railway, maybe, or mining expansion. He was going to take his suspicions to the federal marshal in Prescott, but he never made it. Cave-in happened 2 days before he was set to leave. The boy, Tom Jake, remembered now named for his father, coughed again, wet, rattling the sound of lungs full of fluid. The girl Rose rubbed his back in slow circles, whispering soft words in Gaelic. "You can't stay here," Jake heard himself say. Kane meant what he said. 3 days he'll be back with legal papers and more guns. This place ain't defensible. Where else would we go? Mary's laugh had tears in it now. This is all we have. This broken-down cabin and an empty rifle. We have nowhere else. Jake thought of his own place 5 miles north in the foothills. Solid walls, good sight lines far enough from town that Kane would think twice about riding up unannounced. He'd built it for Elizabeth and Samuel back when he'd thought he could hang up his badge and be a family man. Now it sat empty except for him and his ghosts. "Get your things," he said. Mary blinked. "What?" "Get your things, whatever you can carry. Warm clothes, blankets, any food you got left." Jake moved to the window, checking the road. Still clear, but that wouldn't last. "You're coming with me." "We can't just—" "Yes, you can." He turned back to her. "I got a place north of here. Solid cabin, warm stove, clean water. Defensible. You and your children need somewhere safe, and I got room." "Why?" Mary's eyes narrowed with suspicion. 3 years of frontier living had taught her that men didn't offer help without wanting something in return. "Why would you help us?" "You don't know us." Jake looked at Tom, at the boy's labored breathing, at Rose trying to be brave. He saw other children 3 years gone who he hadn't been there to save. "Because I can. Because once upon a time, that would have been reason enough." He moved toward the door. "And because Luther Kane needs to learn that some people still fight back. You got 10 minutes to pack." "This is crazy. You're talking about taking in complete strangers." 9 minutes. Mary stared at him for a long moment. Jake could see her weighing her options: stay and face Kane in 3 days with no money, and no help or trust, a broken-down ex-ranger who smelled like whiskey and regret. Tom coughed again, harder this time, and that made the decision for her. "Rose, pack the clothes, whatever's warm and not torn too bad. Tom, you sit still and try to breathe slow." Mary moved with sudden purpose, gathering what little they had. "Mr. Hawkins, there's a root cellar behind the cabin. There's preserved vegetables there, some salt pork. We'll need it." Jake nodded and went outside. The December air was sharp, but the snow hadn't started yet. Still, he could smell it coming, that metallic taste that meant a storm building in the mountains. They'd need to move fast. The root cellar was half collapsed, but he found 2 sacks of potatoes, some dried beans, strips of jerky that might have been beef or might have been something else. It would keep them fed for a few days at least. When he came back, the Sullivans were ready. They had 2 bundles of clothes, a few blankets, and a small wooden box that Mary clutched like it contained the crown jewels. Jake didn't ask what was in it. Everyone was entitled to their treasures. "Can the boy ride?" Jake asked. "I can ride." Tom's voice was thin but determined. "I'm not a baby." "Never said you were son." Jake found himself almost smiling. "Just need to know if we need 1 horse or 2. They had 1 horse, an old mare that looked like she'd seen better decades. Jake's own horse was stabled at Murphy's. It would take both animals to carry them all, and even then it would be the slow going. "Wait here," he told them. "Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." He made it to Murphy's and back in 20 minutes, leading his bay gelding. Murphy had given him a look, but hadn't asked questions. In Devil's Creek, you learn not to ask questions when a man who'd been drunk for 3 years suddenly needed his horse. They loaded quickly. Mary and Rose on the old mare, Tom in front of Jake on the bay. The boy weighed nothing, just bird bones and determination wrapped in a too thin coat. "Where are we going?" Tom asked as they started north. "Somewhere safe." "Is it far?" 5 miles, maybe 6. "Will there be a bed?" "A real bed. We've been sleeping on straw since Papa died." Jake's throat tightened. Yeah, son, there's beds. Real ones. They rode in silence for a while, following the old Apache trail that wound through the foothills. Jake kept checking their back trail, but no one followed. Not yet. Kane would need time to lick his wounds and plan his next move. The sun was starting to drop toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Tom's breathing had steadied some, the cleaner air helping his lungs. You were really a ranger, the boy asked. Long time ago. Papa said rangers were heroes, said they kept people safe from bandits and Indians. And your papa was being generous. Did you ever meet Wyatt Earp? Once or twice. Was he as fast as they say? Jake thought about it. He was fast enough. They were 3 miles out when Jake noticed the rider. Just a speck on their back trail, hanging back but matching their pace. Could be anyone. Could be coincidence. But Jake had survived 15 years as a ranger by not believing in coincidence. Mrs. Sullivan, son, he said quietly, can you and Rose ride a little faster? Mary looked back at him and understood immediately. How many? Just one that I can see. Probably a scout. She urged the old mare to a faster pace. The horse protested but obeyed, and they made better time through the winding trail. The rider stayed back but kept following. Jake's cabin appeared just as the last light was fading from the sky. It sat solid and uncompromising against a backdrop of red rocks and scattered pines. He'd built it to last with thick walls and small windows that could be shuttered against attack. Elizabeth had called it a fortress. She'd been right. Inside quick, he told them, dismounting and lifting Tom down. The boy swayed but stayed upright. Mary and Rose got the horses into the small stable while Jake carried their bundles inside. The cabin was cold and dark, but it was clean. He'd kept it clean for 3 years, like Elizabeth might walk through the door any moment and scold him for letting dust gather. He got a fire going in the stone fireplace, then lit 2 oil lamps. Warm light pushed back the shadows, revealing a main room with solid furniture, a kitchen area with a real stove, and 2 doors leading to bedrooms. It's beautiful, Rose breathed, running her hand along the polished pine table. It's warm, Mary said, and Jake heard years of cold nights in those 2 words. Tom had collapsed into a chair by the fire, his breathing labored but steady. Jake found the medicine box Elizabeth had kept stocked, pulled out a small bottle of laudanum. Few drops of this in warm water, he told Mary. It'll help him breathe easier and sleep. I can't pay you for... Didn't ask you to. He went back outside to tend the horses and check the perimeter. The rider was gone, but Jake knew he'd be back. Kane didn't give up easy, and Judge Blackwood didn't forgive it all. When he came back in, Mary had Tom bundled in blankets by the fire, the medicine already working to ease his breathing. Rose was exploring the kitchen, marveling at the cookware and preserved goods in the pantry. There's enough food here for an army, she said. My wife liked to be prepared. The words came out before Jake could stop them. Mary looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. The Apache raid, 3 years ago, that was your family. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. I'm sorry. So am I. They made a simple dinner of beans and salt pork with some of the preserved vegetables from Mary's root cellar. It was the first time Jake had cooked for anyone but himself in 3 years. The first time his table had heard conversation and laughter. Rose had her father's gift for storytelling, and even Tom smiled at her impression of Luther Kane's drawl. After dinner, Jake showed them to the spare bedroom. It had been meant for Samuel when he got older, but the boy had never gotten the chance to use it. Now Tom and Rose would sleep in the bed Jake had built with his own hands for a son who'd never see his 6th birthday. Mr. Hawkins, Mary said quietly while the children got ready for bed. What you did today, standing up to Kane? No one's done that before. No one's been willing to cross Judge Blackwood. Someone should have. Thomas tried. Look what happened to him. Jake met her eyes. I'm not Thomas. I've got less to lose and more experience with men like Kane. You have got everything to lose. Your home, your life. Already lost everything that mattered. House is just walls and a roof. As for my life, Jake shrugged. Haven't been doing much with it lately anyway. Mary was quiet for a moment, then reached out and touched his arm. Just briefly, just a moment of human connection. Thank you. Whatever your reasons, thank you. After she went to tend the children, Jake sat by the fire with his rifle across his knees. The writer would report back to Kane. Kane would report to Blackwood. And then they'd come. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Jake checked his ammunition, 23 rounds for the rifle, 18 for the Navy Colt. Not much for a war, but maybe enough for a statement. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The storm was coming down from the mountains now, bringing snow and worse weather. That was good. It would make travel harder for Kane's men. He thought about the scared family now sleeping in his spare room, about Mary's fierce courage in the face of impossible odds, about Tom's struggle to breathe and Rose's determination to hold her family together, about Thomas Sullivan asking questions that got him killed. Judge Blackwood. Jake had suspected for years that the judge was corrupt, but suspicion wasn't proof. Now, though with the Sullivan story and the land grabs along Skeleton Ridge, patterns were emerging. The kind of patterns that suggested something big was coming to Devil's Creek, something worth killing for. Jake stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, Luther Kane was planning his next move. Judge Blackwood was counting his money and deciding who else needed to disappear. And the federal marshal in Prescott had no idea what was happening in this corner of the territory. But Jake knew, and for the first time in 3 years he had a reason to care. He'd failed to save Elizabeth and Samuel, failed to be there when they needed him most. That failure had hollowed him out, left him a walking ghost haunting Murphy's saloon. But today, when he'd heard those gunshots and that child's cry, something had awakened. Not hope exactly, not redemption, just purpose. The Sullivans needed protection. They needed someone who could stand between them and the violence that was coming. And Jake, broken as he was, could still do that. Could still be the wall between the innocent and the evil. He settled back in his chair, rifle ready, and waited for dawn. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. Kane would regroup. Blackwood would escalate. The 3-day deadline would start counting down. But tonight, a family slept safe and warm in his cabin. A boy could breathe a little easier. A widow didn't have to face her fears alone. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, covering the desert in a blanket of white. The storm had arrived. Jake Hawkins, former Texas Ranger, current drunk, and unexpected protector, kept his vigil through the night. Some fights you lost, some ghosts you couldn't escape. But sometimes, if you were lucky, you got a chance to make something right, even if it killed you in the end. Especially if it killed you in the end. Because after 3 years of dying slowly, Jake had finally found a way to make his death mean something. And that, he thought as he watched the snowfall, was worth any price Kane and Blackwood could extract. The night deepened, the storm intensified, and Jake waited. He'd been waiting 3 years for something worth fighting for. Now he'd found it. Dawn came gray and bitter, filtered through a curtain of falling snow. Jake hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his chair by the door, rifle across his knees, listening to the storm build outside and Tom's breathing inside. Every hour or so he'd added wood to the fire, keeping the cabin warm enough that the boy's lungs wouldn't seize. Mary emerged from the bedroom just as the coffee finished boiling. She moved quietly, the way people did when they'd learned that mornings could bring bad news. "Any trouble?" she asked, accepting the cup he offered. "Not yet. Storm's keeping everyone inside." She sat across from him at the table, and in the morning light he could see the bruise spreading along her jaw where Kane had struck her. Her hands wrapped around the Kyvie cup were scraped raw from fighting. "You didn't sleep," she observed. "Got out of the habit." "Mr. Hawkins." "Jake." "Jake." She tested the name like she was tasting something foreign. "What happens when the storm passes?" "Kane comes, probably with more men, maybe with the sheriff. Sheriff Morrison's not a bad man, just weak. Weak men in badges can be worse than evil ones. They'll do wrong and call it keeping the peace." Mary stared into her coffee. "Thomas used to say something similar. He said the worst evil was done by people who looked the other way." "Smart man. Dead man." The bitterness in her voice could have curdled milk. "Being right doesn't stop bullets." "No, but sometimes it makes them worth taking." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind howl around the cabin's corners. Then Mary reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small leather journal, worn and water-stained. This was Thomas's. He wrote everything down: names, dates, amounts of money changing hands. She pushed it across the table to Jake. "The night before he died, he gave it to me. Said if anything happened, I should get it to someone who could use it. Jake opened the journal. Thomas Sullivan's handwriting was careful and precise, the writing of a man who'd had little formal education, but took pride in what he'd learned. The entries went back 6 months, documenting a pattern of intimidation and land grabs along Skeleton Ridge. Samuel Ortega refused to sell, barn burned. Maria Castellanos, widow threatened at gunpoint, fled with children. Robert Park found shot on his own property, ruled suicide despite gun being 20 feet from body. Jake kept reading. The picture that emerged was systematic and ruthless. Judge Blackwood was clearing a corridor of land from Devil's Creek to the Colorado River. But for what? Turn to the last entry, Mary said quietly. Jake flipped to the final page. Thomas's usually neat handwriting was hurried, agitated. Overheard Kane and stranger at Murphy's. Railroad coming through. Southern Pacific extending line from Tucson. Route goes right through Skeleton Ridge properties. Judge buying land for $10 an acre, selling to railroad for $100. Getting rich on our graves. The entry was dated 2 days before Thomas's death. A railroad. Jake felt pieces clicking into place. That's why Blackwood needs the land cleared fast. Railroad surveys are probably already filed. Construction could start by spring. And anyone still holding property along the route gets fair market value from the railroad. But if Blackwood owns it all, he makes a fortune and the railroad doesn't have to negotiate with dozens of small holders. Tom's cough interrupted them. The boy stood in the bedroom doorway, blanket wrapped around thin shoulders, face flushed with fever. Mama, Mary was up instantly, feeling his forehead, checking his breathing. You should be in bed, love. Heard voices, thought the bad men came back. Not yet, Jake said, and when they do, they'll have to get through me first. Tom looked at him with eyes too old for his years. You can't fight them all. Don't need to fight them all. Just need to fight them long enough. Long enough for what? Jake thought about lying, giving the boy false comfort. But children who'd lost fathers to violence didn't believe in comfortable lies anymore. Long enough to make sure you and your family are safe. That's all that matters. Rose appeared behind her brother, fully dressed and alert. I'll help. I can shoot. Papa taught me. No, Mary's voice was sharp. No guns for you. Mama, I said no. I've lost enough to violence. I won't have my daughter adding to it. Rose's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Jake of her mother. So we just wait, just let them come and take everything. We survive, Mary said. That's what we do. We survive. But Jake could see the doubt in her eyes. Survival had a price, and sometimes that price was everything that made survival worth it. He stood, decision made. I need to ride to town. In this storm, that's suicide. Storm's the only reason it might work. Kane won't expect anyone moving in this weather. Jake checked his guns, pulled on his heavy coat. There's someone I need to see, someone who might be able to help. Who? Old friend. Haven't talked to him in 3 years, but he owes me. More important, he hates Blackwood more than he fears him. Mary grabbed his arm as he headed for the door. What if Kane comes while you're gone? Jake handed her his Navy Colt. You remember what I taught you about this last night? She nodded. They'd spent an hour after the children went to bed, Jake showing her how to load, aim, and fire. Her hands had been steady, her aim better than expected. 6 shots, he said. Make them count. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone you don't know. Jake. She said his name soft like a prayer. Come back. Planning on it, he went out into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical force, driving snow horizontal across the landscape. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. His horse protested, but responded to his touch, picking its way carefully down the trail. It took him 2 hours to make the 5 miles to town. By the time he reached the outskirts of Devil's Creek, he couldn't feel his fingers or toes. Ice had formed in his beard, and his eyes burned from squinting against the snow. The town was a ghost. No one moved on the streets. Even the saloons were shuttered against the storm. Jake tied his horse in the lee of the abandoned assay office and made his way on foot to a small house on the Mexican side of town. He knocked 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. An old signal from Ranger days. The door opened a crack. A shotgun barrel appeared first, then a weathered brown face with suspicious eyes. Madre de Dios, Jake Hawkins. Hello, Miguel. Miguel Esperanza had been Jake's scout for 5 years back when Jake wore a badge. They'd saved each other's lives more times than either could count. When Jake resigned after his family's death, Miguel had understood. He'd lost his own family to violence years before. "You look half dead, hermano. Feel all dead. You going to let me in, or we going to chat through the door?" Miguel stepped back, lowering the shotgun. His small house was warm and smelled of coffee and tamales. Jake's stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since yesterday's dinner. "Sit," Miguel commanded. "Eat. Then tell me why Jake Hawkins breaks 3 years of silence to appear at my door in the middle of a blizzard." Jake sat and ate while Miguel's wife Rosa fussed over his half-frozen state. The food was perfect, hot-spiced, substantial. It reminded him of better times when he and Miguel would make camp on the trail, sharing stories and meals under desert stars. "Now," Miguel said when Jake had finished, "talk." Jake told him everything. The Sullivans, Kane Judge Blackwood, the railroad conspiracy. Miguel listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. "Thomas Sullivan was a good man," Miguel said finally. "Helped my cousin's family when they had nothing. And the judge," he spat, "that man is a cancer. He owns the sheriff, controls the town council, has his hand in every dirty deal from here to Tucson. I need proof, Miguel. Real evidence that could hold up in federal court. You think the federal marshal will care? He's 100 miles away in Prescott. He'll care if we have enough evidence, and if we can get the newspapers involved. Railroad stealing land from war widows and orphans, that's a story that sells papers from here to San Francisco." Miguel was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's talk," he said finally. "Down in the Mexican Quarter, people who work in the judge's house clean his office. They see things, hear things." "What kind of things?" "Papers, telegrams from railroad executives, maps with properties marked, lists of names." Miguel leaned forward. "The judge keeps everything in a safe in his study. My nephew's wife, Carmen, she cleans there twice a week, says the judge sometimes forgets to lock it when he's been drinking." "When does she clean next?" "Tomorrow. But Jake, even if you get evidence the judge owns this town, you'll never make it to Prescott alive." "Not planning to go to Prescott." Jake pulled out Thomas Sullivan's journal. "I'm going to make copies of everything. Send one to the federal marshal, one to the territorial governor, and one to a newspaper friend in San Francisco. 3 directions, 3 chances for justice. And if Blackwood finds out, then we have a different kind of justice." Miguel studied him for a long moment. "The Jake Hawkins I knew wouldn't talk about killing judges. The Jake Hawkins you knew had something to lose. And now I've got something to protect. It's different." They spent the next hour planning. Carmen would leave a window unlatched in the judge's study. Miguel would create a distraction at the Silver Dollar Saloon where Blackwood spent most evenings. Jake would have maybe 20 minutes to get in, crack the safe if needed, and get out with evidence. "What about the Sullivans?" Miguel asked. "Kane won't wait forever. I left them fortified at my cabin. Mary Sullivan's tougher than she looks." "Tough doesn't stop bullets." "No, but smart might, and she's smart." As Jake prepared to leave, Miguel grabbed his arm. "Jake, after this is over, what then? You can't go back to drinking yourself to death at Murphy's." "Wasn't planning to." "Then what?" Jake thought about Mary's green eyes, about Tom's labored breathing, about Rose's fierce determination. "Maybe I'll try living for a change. See how that goes." Miguel smiled, the first real smile Jake had seen from him. "About damn time, hermano." The ride back was worse than the ride in. The storm had intensified, and Jake had to trust his horse's instincts more than his own frozen senses. Twice he thought he heard riders in the wind, but when he stopped to listen, there was only the howl of the storm. He was a mile from his cabin when he saw the tracks. Fresh horse prints, already half filled with snow, but still visible. 3, maybe 4 riders heading toward his place. Jake urged his tired horse faster. The cabin appeared through the snow like a dark shadow against white. No smoke from the chimney, no light in the windows. His heart stopped. He dismounted, running rifle in hand. The front door was intact, still barred from inside. He circled to the back. Kitchen door was closed but not barred. Fresh boot prints in the snow leading away. Jake went in low and fast, rifle ready. The cabin was empty. Cold. The fire had been out for at least an hour. Furniture was overturned. Blood on the floor, not much, just drops leading toward the back door. On the table, held down by a knife thrust through it, was a note. Hawkins, you have something I want. I have something you want. Come to the old Martinez mine at sundown. Come alone, come unarmed, or the widow and her brats feed the coyotes. Kane. Jake's hands shook as he read it. Not from cold, from rage. The Martinez mine was 5 miles southeast, an abandoned silver mine that had played out 10 years ago. It was isolated, defensible, and perfect for an ambush. Kane had chosen well. Sundown was in 3 hours. Not enough time to get help. Not enough time to plan. Just enough time to decide what mattered more, his life or theirs. Jake looked around the empty cabin. 3 years he'd lived here alone with ghosts and regret. 3 days ago, the Sullivans had filled it with life and laughter. Tom's wheeze, Rose's stories, Mary's quiet strength. He'd failed one family. Failed to be there when they needed him. That failure had defined him, consumed him, nearly destroyed him. But maybe failure wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of learning how to do better. Jake began to prepare. He cleaned and loaded every weapon he owned, strapped a hideout gun to his ankle, another inside his coat, filled his pockets with ammunition. Kane had said come unarmed, but Kane was a liar and a killer. Jake would come armed for war. As he worked, he thought about the choice ahead. He could run, take the evidence to Prescott himself, let the Sullivans face their fate. It was the smart play, the survivor's play. But Jake was tired of surviving, tired of living with ghosts, tired of waking up each morning disappointed that he had. The Sullivans had given him something he'd thought lost forever, a reason to fight that wasn't about vengeance or duty, but about protection, about standing between evil and innocent, about being the wall that wouldn't break. He'd been a ranger for 15 years, been a drunk for 3, but today in this moment he was something else, something simpler. He was a man who'd heard a child's cry and answered it, who'd seen a woman's courage and matched it, who'd been given a second chance at meaning. The choice, when he thought about it, was no choice at all. Jake Hawkins would ride to the Martinez mine. He would face Luther Kane. He would save the Sullivans or die trying, because some things were worth dying for. And living without them wasn't living at all. He saddled his horse as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, painting the snow-covered desert in shades of gold and shadow. The storm was passing. The real tempest was just beginning. Jake checked his weapons one more time, then mounted up. Behind him, his empty cabin stood silent in the snow. Ahead, the trail to the Martinez mine wound through rocks and memories. 3 hours until sundown. 3 hours to plan a miracle. 3 hours to decide whether Jake Hawkins died a drunk's death or a hero's. He touched his spurs to his horse's flanks and rode toward his fate, leaving the safety of his cabin behind. Some journeys you took knowing you wouldn't return. Some fights you fought knowing you couldn't win. But sometimes in the space between certain death and impossible odds, miracles happened. Jake had stopped believing in miracles 3 years ago. Today he was willing to try again. The trail to the mine was treacherous on a good day. Now covered in snow and ice, it was nearly impassable. Jake's horse picked its way carefully along the narrow path that wound up into the hills. On his left, the land fell away into a canyon so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. On his right, red rock cliffs rose toward a sky now clearing to winter blue. As he rode, Jake's mind worked through scenarios. The mine had only one entrance, a deliberate choice by Kane. No way to sneak in, no way to surprise them. Just a direct approach into whatever trap they'd set. But Jake knew something Kane didn't. He'd been to the Martinez mine before 15 years ago, chasing Apache raiders who'd used it as a hideout. There was another way, in an air shaft on the hillside above, barely wide enough for a man. It dropped 30 feet straight down into the main tunnel. Dangerous, probably suicidal in this weather, but possible. 2 miles from the mine, Jake stopped. He could see smoke rising from the entrance. They'd built a fire inside. That was good. Fire meant light blindness. Men watching a fire couldn't see into darkness. He tied his horse to a scraggly juniper and continued on foot, climbing above the trail to approach from the hillside. The snow had stopped, but the wind still cut like a blade. His boots slipped on icy rocks, and twice he nearly fell into the canyon below. The air shaft was where he remembered it, covered now with a rusted grate. Jake pried it open with his knife, wincing at the screech of metal. He dropped a stone down. 3 seconds before it hit bottom, 30 feet, maybe 35. From below, he could hear voices echoing up the shaft. Kane's laugh, another man's rough joke, and then Tom's cough. The boy was alive. They were all alive. Jake pulled off his gun belt and coat, tying them into a bundle with his rifle. He'd lower them down first, then follow. The shaft was tight, barely 18 inches wide. If he got stuck, he'd die there like a rat in a pipe. He dropped the bundle, heard it hit soft earth at the bottom. Then he lowered himself in feet first, back pressed against one wall, hands and feet against the other. Inch by inch, he descended into darkness. Halfway down, his foot slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, he was falling. Then his hands caught skin tearing on rough stone and he stopped himself. Blood made his grip slick, but he kept going. When his feet finally touched solid ground, Jake was shaking with exhaustion. He stood in absolute darkness, feeling for his weapons, found them strapped on his guns, and waited for his eyes to adjust. Ahead, around a bend in the tunnel, firelight flickered on stone walls. The voices were clearer now. "Should have been here by now," Kane was saying. "Sun's almost down." "Maybe he ran," another voice suggested. "Man's been a coward for 3 years." "He'll come." This was a new voice, cultured and cold. Judge Blackwood. "Men like Hawkins can't help themselves. They have to play hero." Jake moved forward silently, a rifle ready. The tunnel curved, and he could see into the main chamber of the mine. A fire burned in the center. Kane stood near it with 3 other gunmen. Judge Blackwood sat on a crate, looking incongruous in his expensive suit. And against the far wall, tied and gagged, were the Sullivans. Mary had a cut on her forehead, blood dried in her hair. Rose was crying silently. Tom was barely conscious, his breathing worse than ever. The cold and fear were killing him slowly. Jake counted the opposition. Kane plus 3 gunmen. Blackwood was probably armed, but not a fighter. 5 targets, and Jake had surprise. But the Sullivans were directly in the line of fire. Any shooting would put them at risk. He needed a distraction. Jake found what he was looking for, an old dynamite crate forgotten from mining days. 3 sticks, sweating nitroglycerin in the cold. Unstable as hell. Perfect. He lit the fuse with a match, counted to 3, then threw it down a side tunnel and ducked. The explosion shook the entire mine. Dust and rocks rained from the ceiling. The gunmen spun toward the side tunnel, guns drawn. Jake came out of the darkness firing. His first shot took one gunman in the chest, dropping him instantly. The second shot caught another in the shoulders, spinning him into the fire. Jake dove behind a mining rat as Kane and the remaining gunmen returned fire. Bullets sparked off stone and metal. Jake could hear Blackwood shouting orders, Kane cursing. In the chaos, he saw Mary working at her bonds using a sharp rock Rose had found. Jake popped up, fired twice more, then ducked as bullets chipped stone where his head had been. The wounded gunman was screaming, rolling to put out his burning clothes. That left Kane and 1 other still fighting. "Hawkins!" Kane's voice was raw with anger. "Show yourself, you son of a bitch!" Jake answered with his rifle, the shot catching the last gunman in the leg, dropping him. Now it was just Kane, and Kane had moved. He stood behind the Sullivans now, pistol pressed to Mary's head. "Drop the rifle, Hawkins. Drop it, or I paint the wall with her brains." Jake stood slowly, rifle still raised. "You kill her, you lose your shield. I kill her, you go crazy, make a mistake, and I kill you too." Oh, Kane's smile was ugly in the firelight. "Besides, the judge only needs the land. The widow's not important. She is to me. Touching. The drunk found something to care about. Too bad it's going to get her killed." Tom coughed, the sound wet and desperate. The boy was suffocating, drowning in his own lungs. He had minutes, maybe less. "Let the boy go," Jake said. "He's dying. At least let him die in his mother's arms." Kane laughed. "You're not in a position to negotiate." That's when Rose moved. The girl had worked her hands free while everyone focused on Jake. She grabbed a rock and swung it with all her 13-year-old strength into Kane's knee. Kane screamed, his gun swinging toward Rose. Jake didn't think. He just moved, crossing 15 feet in 2 seconds, slamming into Kane before he could fire. They went down hard, rolling across the stone floor. Kane was younger, stronger, but Jake had 15 years of experience and nothing left to lose. They fought with fists and knees and teeth, 2 animals in the dirt. Kane got on top, hands around Jake's throat. Jake's vision started to gray. Then his hand found the hideout gun in his boot. He pulled it, pressed it to Kane's ribs, and fired. Kane's eyes went wide. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then back at Jake. You, you shot me. Yeah, Kane fell sideways, clutching his side. He tried to raise his pistol, but Jake kicked it away. The outlaw lay there, blood pooling beneath him, eyes already going glassy. Hawkins! Jake stood breathing hard and looked down at the dying man. What? This ain't over. The judge. He's got more men. They're coming. Kane's head fell back. He was gone. Jake turned to find Judge Blackwood pointing a derringer at him. The judge's hand shook, but at this range he couldn't miss. You've ruined everything, Blackwood said. Years of planning, fortunes to be made. And you've ruined it all. For what? For them. He gestured at the Sullivans with disgust. For what's right. Blackwood laughed, bitter and cold. Right, there is no right. There's only power, and those too weak to take it. Your mistake, Jake said quietly, was thinking I was weak. Your mistake was coming here at all. The judge pulled the trigger. The gun clicked. Misfire. Blackwood's eyes went wide with shock. Jake crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and hit Blackwood once, a solid punch that had 3 years of rage behind it. The judge went down and didn't get up. Jake stood there for a moment, breathing hard, blood dripping from his torn hands. Then Tom's desperate gasping brought him back. He cut the Sullivans free with his knife. Mary immediately pulled Tom to her, holding him as he fought for each breath. He needs a doctor, she said, tears streaming down her face. He's dying. Jake knelt beside them. The boy's lips were blue, his eyes unfocused. Jake had seen this before. The lungs were failing. Without medicine, Tom had minutes. But then Jake remembered something. He dug in Blackwood's coat pockets, found what he was looking for, a small bottle of laudanum, the expensive kind from San Francisco. Blackwood's personal supply for his bad back. Hold him still, Jake told Mary. He mixed the laudanum with water from his canteen, carefully measured the dose. Too much would kill Tom. Too little wouldn't help. He'd seen Army doctors do this for soldiers with lung wounds. Drink, son, slow and easy. Tom drank, coughing and sputtering. For a moment, nothing changed. Then gradually his breathing eased. The medicine relaxed the spasming muscles in his chest, let air flow a little easier. It wasn't a cure, but it might keep him alive until they could get real help. We need to get out of here, Jake said. Kane was right. Blackwood will have more men coming. They gathered what they could. Jake took Blackwood's papers from his coat, telegrams, contracts, enough evidence to hang him even if he survived. The judge was breathing but unconscious. Jake tied him up and left him by the dying fire. The law could deal with him. They emerged from the mine as the last light faded from the sky. Jake's horse was where he'd left it, and they found the horses Kane's men had ridden. They mounted up Mary with Tom, Rose with Jake, and rode hard for town, but they didn't go to Jake's cabin. Instead, Jake led them to Miguel's house. His friend was waiting, having heard the explosion from the mine. Dios mío, you look like hell. Feel worse. Miguel, I need you to hide them. Blackwood's men will come looking. Already done. Rosa's preparing the hidden room. We've hidden families before. While Rose attended to Tom with her herbal medicines, Jake and Miguel planned their next move. The evidence from Blackwood's coat, combined with Thomas Sullivan's journal, and what Carmen could copy from the safe would be enough to bring federal intervention. I'll ride for Prescott tonight, Jake said. Get to the federal marshal by tomorrow night. In your condition, you're half dead already. 3/4 dead, but that leaves 1/4 to finish this. Mary appeared in the doorway. She'd washed the blood from her face, but exhaustion made her look fragile as glass. You're leaving. Have to. Evidence needs to get to Prescott before Blackwood can cover his tracks. You saved us. You saved my children. Not done saving you yet. She crossed to him, took his torn hands in hers. Jake Hawkins, you stubborn fool. You could have walked away. Should have walked away. No, I've done enough walking away for one lifetime. She stood on her toes and kissed him. Just once, soft and quick, but it was like sunlight breaking through 3 years of clouds. Come back, she said. We'll be waiting. Jake looked at her, at this brave woman who'd lost everything and kept fighting. At Rose growing up too fast but strong as steel. At Tom breathing easier now, fighting his way back from death's edge. 3 days ago, he'd been a drunk, waiting to die. Now he had a reason to live. A family that wasn't his but could be. A future that might be worth having. "I'll come back," he promised. "Count on it." He rode out as the moon rose, carrying evidence that would bring down a corrupt judge and save dozens of families. Behind him, hidden and protected, the Sullivans waited. Ahead, the trail to Prescott stretched through desert and danger. Jake Hawkins, no longer a ranger, no longer a drunk, but something new. A protector. A man with purpose rode through the night toward justice. The choice had been made. Now came the consequences. The federal marshal's office in Prescott was a solid brick building that spoke of law and permanence in a territory still half wild. Jake had ridden through the night and most of the next day, stopping only to rest his horse and gulp water from his canteen. His body was failing the fight at the mine. The blood loss from his torn hands, the endless miles had pushed him past exhaustion into something else. But Thomas Sullivan's journal and Judge Blackwood's papers burned like fire in his saddlebags. Marshal William Corbett was a tall man with gray eyes that had seen too much. He listened without interrupting as Jake laid out the evidence, the journal, the telegrams from Southern Pacific, the contracts showing Blackwood buying land for $10 an acre and selling it to the railroad for $100. This is, Corbett paused, reading through the papers again. This is conspiracy murder fraud on a massive scale. Judge Samuel Blackwood. I've heard rumors for years, but this? There are 3 witnesses hidden in Devil's Creek, Jake said. The Sullivan family. They'll testify if you can keep them safe. I can do better than that. Corbett stood, energy crackling through his movements. I'm calling in the Army. Fort Whipple has a cavalry unit that's been itching for something to do. We'll ride for Devil's Creek at dawn with enough men to arrest Blackwood and every corrupt official in that town. Dawn might be too late. Blackwood knows I have his papers. He'll run or fight. Then we leave now. Corbett called for his deputy. Round up every available man. We ride in an hour. While Corbett organized his force, Jake found a doctor to tend his hands. The old Army surgeon cleaned and bandaged the torn flesh, gave him laudanum for the pain. Jake refused it. He needed his mind clear. You should rest, the doctor said. You're about to collapse. I'll rest when this is finished. It might finish you first. Jake thought about Mary's kiss, about Tom's desperate breathing, about Rose's courage in attacking Cain. Some things are worth being finished for. They rode out as the sun touched the western mountains, 15 federal marshals, 20 cavalry soldiers, and 1 broken ex-ranger who'd found something worth fighting for. The pace was hard but steady, eating up the miles between Prescott and Devil's Creek. Halfway there, they met a rider coming fast from the south. Jake recognized him, Carlos, one of Miguel's nephews. Senor Jake. Thank God. Miguel sent me to find you. What's wrong? Judge Blackwood survived. He's gathered his men, maybe 20 guns. They've surrounded Miguel's house. They know the Sullivans are inside. Jake's blood went cold. This morning, Miguel and his cousins are holding them off, but they're outnumbered. The judge says if the Sullivans don't come out by sundown, he'll burn the house with everyone inside. Marshal Corbett spurred his horse forward. How far? 30 miles, Jake said. Hard riding. Then we ride hard. Drawa. Corbett turned to his men. You heard him. There are innocent lives at stake. We push the horses to their limits. They rode like the devil was behind them, the horses lathered with sweat, men grim-faced and determined. Jake pushed hardest of all, his exhausted mount responding to his desperate urgency. The sun was a bloody eye on the horizon when they crested the final ridge above Devil's Creek. Below, they could see Miguel's house surrounded by armed men. Gunfire sparked in the growing darkness. Smoke rose from a fire someone had started against the back wall. Form up, Corbett commanded quietly. Cavalry on the flanks, marshals with me down the center. We hit them hard and fast before they know we're here. Wait, Jake said. He could see the tactical situation. Blackwood's men were focused on the house, but they'd fortified their positions. A frontal assault would be a bloodbath. There's another way, he explained quickly. The old mine road ran behind Miguel's property, hidden by a ridge. A small force could circle around, hit them from behind, while the main force attacked from the front. It's a good plan, Corbett agreed. Take 5 men and I go alone. I know the terrain, and 1 man can move quieter than 6. That's suicide. Maybe, but it gives you the best chance to save them. Corbett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Godspeed, Hawkins. Jake circled wide, using every bit of cover the desert provided. Behind him, he could hear Corbett positioning his men. The federal forces would wait for Jake's signal shots from behind Blackwood's line before attacking. The mine road was overgrown with creosote and sage, but Jake found it in the dying light. He left his horse and continued on foot, rifle in hand, moving ghost quiet through the brush. He could hear voices now. Blackwood's men, confident in their numbers, talking and joking as they kept the house under siege. Burn them out like rats. Judge wants the woman alive. Says she needs to sign papers first. What about the kids? What about them? Jake's finger found his trigger. But not yet. He needed to be closer, needed to position himself where his shots would cause maximum confusion. Then he heard Tom scream. The sound came from the house, high and terrified. Jake's control snapped. He came out of the brush firing. His first shot took a man in the back, dropping him instantly. The second caught another, turning toward the sound. Jake lever-actioned and fired again, then again, moving constantly, making himself a hard target in the growing darkness. Blackwood's men spun in confusion, caught between the house's defenders and this new threat from behind. Then Corbett's cavalry charged. The thunder of 30 horses shook the ground. Federal marshals fired from the saddle. Cavalry sabers flashed in the last light. Blackwood's men, caught in a crossfire, threw down their weapons or died where they stood. Jake fought his way toward the house, searching for Blackwood in the chaos. He found him trying to escape on horseback, riding hard for the desert. Jake didn't think. He grabbed a horse whose he didn't know and gave chase. They rode through the desert twilight, two men driven by opposite desperations. Blackwood was the better rider, but his horse was already tired from the siege. Jake's mount was fresher, slowly closing the distance. They reached the canyon where this had all started, where Jake had first heard the shots that brought him to the Sullivans. Blackwood's horse stumbled on the rocky trail, throwing him. The judge hit hard, rolling down the slope toward the canyon edge. Jake dismounted, rifle ready, and followed on foot. He found Blackwood at the canyon's edge, one leg clearly broken, trying to crawl away from the drop. The judge's expensive suit was torn and bloody. His face, always so controlled in court, was twisted with pain and fear. "Don't," Blackwood gasped as Jake approached. "Please, I have money. Thousands. It's yours." "Can't buy your way out of this, one judge. Everything I did was legal. The contracts, the sales, all legal. Murder's not legal. Thomas Sullivan wasn't legal. Those other families you destroyed weren't legal." Blackwood tried to stand, couldn't, fell back, clutching his broken leg. "You think you've won? You think stopping me changes anything? The railroad will still come through. Other men will take my place. The weak will always be crushed by the strong." "Maybe," Jake said, standing over the man who'd caused so much pain. "But not today, and not by you." He could kill Blackwood now. One shot, claimed the judge, tried to escape. No one would question it. The man deserved it, for Thomas Sullivan, for all the families he'd destroyed, for what he tried to do to Mary and her children. Jake raised his rifle. Blackwood closed his eyes, waiting for the shot. It didn't come. "No," Jake said quietly, lowering the weapon. "You're going to live. You're going to, so now I understand, trial. You're going to face every family you hurt, and then you're going to spend the rest of your life in federal prison, remembering what you lost because you couldn't leave decent people alone." He hauled Blackwood to his feet, ignoring the man's screams about his leg, and dragged him back to the horses. By the time they returned to Miguel's house, the fight was over. The federal forces had complete control. Blackwood's surviving men were in chains. The fire at Miguel's house had been put out before it could spread, and standing in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight, was Mary Sullivan. Jake handed Blackwood over to Marshal Corbett and walked toward her on legs that barely held him up. She met him halfway, catching him as he stumbled. "You came back." "Said I would. Tom's okay. The medicine worked. Rose is inside helping with the wounded. We're all okay." Jake touched her face, needing to confirm she was real, that this was real. "It's over. Blackwood's going to prison. The land grabs stop here. You're safe." Mary was crying now, all the strength she'd held for so long finally breaking. "I thought we were going to When they surrounded the house, when Tom couldn't breathe, I thought," "Shh." Jake pulled her close and she buried her face against his chest. "You're safe. That's all that matters." Marshal Corbett approached leading Blackwood in chains. The judge's face was twisted with pain and rage, but also defeat. He knew it was over. Mrs. Sullivan, Corbett said formally, I'll need you to testify at the trial. You and your children. We'll testify, Mary said, steel returning to her voice. We'll tell everyone what this man did to Thomas, to our family, to this whole town. Blackwood spat blood. You think you've won something? I made this town. Without me, it's nothing. Without you, Jake said, it's free. They took Blackwood away, and the crowd that had gathered, Mexican families, small ranchers, all the people who'd lived in fear of the judge's power, began to cheer. Someone started singing. Someone else brought out bottles of tequila. What had begun as a siege turned into a celebration. Jake found himself sitting on Miguel's porch, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Tom sat beside him, breathing easier thanks to the medicine Miguel's wife had been giving him. Mr. Jake, the boy said quietly. Yeah, son. Are you going to stay? Now that the bad men are gone, Jake looked at Mary helping tend wounded with Rose. Thought about his empty cabin in the hills. About 3 years of drinking and waiting to die. About Elizabeth and Samuel, who he'd never stopped mourning, but maybe could stop dying for. Yeah, he said. I think I am. The trial took place 3 weeks later in Prescott. It was the biggest sensation the territory had seen. Newspaper reporters came from as far as Chicago. The courtroom was packed every day. Mary testified with quiet dignity about her husband's death, about the threats about the night Cain and his men came to take everything. Rose spoke clearly about the attack, the kidnapping, the mine. Even Tom, still weak but determined, told the jury about the bad men who'd hurt his mother. Jake testified last, laying out the entire conspiracy with the methodical precision of a lawman presenting evidence. He showed the journal the telegrams, the contracts. He named names, cited dates, connected dots that painted a picture of systematic corruption and murder. Blackwood's expensive lawyers tried everything. They challenged jurisdiction, claimed coercion, argued technicalities. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury was made up of regular people, ranchers, shopkeepers, the kind of folks Blackwood had stepped on for years. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy, fraud, murder, attempted murder. Extortion. The judge, a federal judge brought in from California, sentenced Blackwood to life in federal prison. As they led him away, Blackwood looked at Jake with pure hatred. This isn't over, Hawkins. Yes, it is. And it was. The Southern Pacific, faced with a massive scandal, abandoned their plan and route through Devil's Creek. The land Blackwood had stolen was returned to its rightful owners or their surviving families. The town elected a new judge, an honest Mexican-American lawyer who'd fought Blackwood's corruption for years. Jake stood in the courthouse square after the sentencing, feeling strange. For 3 years, he'd had no purpose except drinking himself to death. Then for 3 weeks, he'd had a purpose, save the Sullivans stop Blackwood. Now both were done, and he didn't know what came next. Mary found him there, Rose and Tom with her. So, she said, what now? I don't know, never thought past the trial. We're going back to Devil's Creek, she said. Going to rebuild, make a real home for the children. That's good. Jake, she took his hand, come with us. Mary, not as a protector or a guardian, we don't need that anymore. Come as family. Jake looked at her, this remarkable woman who'd survived so much. At Rose growing into her own strength. At Tom breathing free and clear for the first time in months. I'm not Thomas. I can't replace him. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be Jake. That's enough. More than enough. I've got a lot of ghosts, Mary. They don't go away easy. Then we'll face them together, the way we faced everything else. Tom tugged on Jake's coat. Please, Mr. Penn. Jake, we already picked out where you're going to teach me to shoot. And Rose wants to learn to track. And Mama smiles when you're around. Tom, Mary blushed, but the boy was right. She did smile when Jake was around. And Jake, who hadn't smiled in 3 years before meeting them, found himself smiling too. All right, he said, let's go home. They returned to Devil's Creek as a family. Not official yet, that would come later, a quiet wedding in the spring with a Miguel as best man and half the Mexican quarter in attendance. But a family in all the ways that mattered. Jake reopened his ranch, but now it was full of life. Tom's laughter, Rose's singing, Mary's quiet strength that held them all together. The ghosts of Elizabeth and Samuel didn't disappear, but they softened, became memories instead of wounds. He taught Tom to shoot and ride, watched the boy grow stronger as clean air and good food and safety did their work. He taught Rose to track and hunt skills no proper lady should know, but every frontier woman needed. And with Mary, he learned something he'd never thought possible, how to be happy again. The railroad did come through eventually, but on a different route, one that compensated landowners fairly. Devil's Creek grew from a rough mining town into a proper community with schools and churches and law that worked for everyone, not just the rich. Jake never put on a badge again, but he didn't need to. He'd found something better than law enforcement. He'd found justice. And more than justice, he'd found redemption. Not in forgetting his failures, but in choosing to try again, despite them. On a warm evening, 6 months after the trial, Jake sat on his porch with Mary beside him, watching Tom and Rose play in the yard. Tom's breathing was strong and clear. The new medicine from San Francisco had worked miracles. Rose was teaching him one of her father's Irish songs, their voices carrying across the desert. "Do you ever regret it?" Mary asked. "Getting involved that day." Jake thought about the question, about the gunshots that had pulled him from his whiskey stupor, about choosing to act instead of ignore, about everything that had followed the danger, the pain, the fear, but also this moment, this family, this life. "No," he said, pulling her closer. "Only thing I regret is that it took me so long to remember who I was supposed to be." "And who's that?" "A man who shows up when people need help. A man who stands between evil and innocent. A man who protects what matters." He kissed her forehead. "A man who loves his family." Mary smiled that smile that had first caught him in that ransacked cabin when she'd stood like a warrior with an empty rifle. "Good thing you remembered when you did." "Yeah, good thing." The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, Luther Kane was buried in an unmarked grave. Judge Blackwood was rotting in federal prison. Thomas Sullivan was resting in peace. His death avenged his family's safe. And Jake Hawkins, former Texas Ranger, former drunk, current husband and father, was exactly where he belonged. Not in the past with his ghosts, not in a bottle hiding from pain, but here now with people who needed him and whom he needed in return. The debt had been paid, the blood had been answered, and in the end, against all odds, justice and love had won. Tom's laughter rang out across the ranch, pure and clear as church bells. Rose joined in, then Mary, then even Jake. And for the first time in years, there were no shadows in the sound. No grief, no regret, just a family laughing together as night fell over Devil's Creek, safe in the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The storm had passed, the reckoning was complete, and Jake Hawkins, who'd once wanted nothing more than to die now, had every reason to live. Sometimes redemption came in strange packages. Sometimes it arrived with gunshots and screams. Sometimes it looked like a desperate widow and her sick children needing help from a broken man who'd forgotten how to give it. But however it came, it was worth the price. Jake stood, pulling Mary up with him. "Come on, let's get the kids inside. Tom needs his medicine and Rose has school tomorrow." "School? Can you imagine our children going to proper school?" "Their father would be proud." Mary touched his face. "Both their fathers are." They went inside together, leaving the past on the porch where it belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: running a ranch, raising children, building a community from the ashes of corruption. But tonight they were together, they were safe, and they were home. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. Once that sound would have reminded Jake of death and loneliness. Now it was just part of the desert night, no more threatening than the wind in the cottonwoods or the creak of the house settling. He closed the door, shutting out the darkness, and turned to face his family in the warm lamplight. Tom was already at the table working on his letters with Rose's help. Mary was preparing dinner, humming an Irish tune he'd come to love. "Mr. Jake," Tom looked up from his work. "Will you tell us a story about when you were a ranger?" Jake sat down, pulling the boy onto his lap. "What kind of story?" "An exciting one with bad guys and horse and shooting." "I might know one or two like that." "But with a happy ending," Rose added. "The best stories have happy endings." Jake looked at Mary, who smiled and nodded. "All right, let me tell you about the time I tracked a gang of cattle thieves through the Chiricahua Mountains. It was spring-like now, and the desert was blooming. He began the story editing out the darker parts, emphasizing the heroism and adventure. Tom listened with wide eyes, Rose with careful attention, Mary with the soft smile of a woman content with her choices. Outside, Devil's Creek settled into sleep, peaceful for the first time in years. The corrupt judge was gone, his empire dismantled. The families he'd terrorized were rebuilding. And in a ranch house 5 miles north of town, a new family was writing their own story. It had started with blood and violence, with greed and corruption. But it ended with justice and love, with children's laughter and lamplight warmth. It ended with a broken man made whole, a desperate family made safe, and a town made free. Jake finished his story, Tom already drowsing against his chest. He carried the boy to bed, Rose following sleepily behind. Tucked them in, heard their prayers. Tom still asked God to help his breathing. Rose asked for her family to stay safe and happy. When he returned to the main room, Mary was waiting. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For choosing us, for choosing life, for choosing to be the man those children think you are." "I'm trying. You're succeeding." They stood together in the lamplight, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. "I love you," Jake said, the words still strange on his tongue after so many years of silence. "I love you too, Jake Hawkins. Every broken, stubborn, heroic piece of you." They went to their room, leaving the lamp burning low for the children. Outside, the desert night went on, full of its own dramas and dangers. But inside, a family slept safe and warm, protected by love and the courage of a man who'd remembered how to fight for something greater than himself. The reckoning was over. The healing had begun. And Jake Hawkins, who'd once prayed for death, now prayed only for more time with the family that had saved him. In saving them, he'd saved himself. And that, more than any gunfight or trial or victory over corruption, was the real triumph. That was the story worth telling. That was the ending worth having. The blood debt had been paid in full, and life, real life, could finally begin.